Okay. Okay, I'm the host. Okay. Thank you, Jane.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Okay. So I'm Linda Hutchinson, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our local news position concurrence meeting tonight. If you didn't hear me before, we'd like everyone to put their name and their local league in the chat. And we'd also like to ask you that if you have questions, put those in the chat, please. That gives us a record of what questions were. And then I feel like we don't miss people because it's raising hands is sometimes difficult to see. And then, okay, I'm not a multitasker, so I have to stop and let people in here. Okay. So we're going to go through a slideshow, and when if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then when the slideshow is completed, our chat wrangler Diana will read the questions from the chat, and different task force members will raise their hands and answer the question. Okay.
Turn
So-
the fire. It's so hard.
And remember to mute your microphone too, please.
Get right back, sweetheart. Stay here.
Okay. Okay. So, everybody have their microphone muted, please. Okay. So, we all know that League is nonpartisan. We do not endorse political parties or candidates, but we do take positions on issues, and that's why we are here today or tonight. My script was from yesterday. The News Access and Literacy Task Force has been studying this issue for about 3 years. We started as the News Literacy Group in Larimer County in 2021, and in 2022 we formed the News Access and Literacy Task Force. That same year we asked Colorado members to add news access and literacy to our Making Democracy Work campaign, and we're back to ask you to adopt a local news position. This slideshow is the background and reasoning behind that request. Oh dear. Okay, now I have to see, did I wait a minute, you guys. I think I left somebody out in the cold here. Somebody
Linda?
was trying,
Linda,
yeah.
if you want to make me a co-host, I can let people in. I think you can do that now that you're the host.
How do I do that? Under more? No.
Go to participants. So that shows on the side of your screen, and go to my name. And
Okay.
you should be able to do that.
Oh, let's see. Oh, okay, I see. And then go to,
Make co-host.
okay, I'm trying to find your name.
It's alphabetical.
Oh, it is?
Uh-huh.
Like, okay, wait a minute. Well, I'm just gonna do a search. I can't find you. Okay, now, how do I make you a host though?
Look at more, the drop-down menu, and see if it gives you that option.
All right, there you go.
Okay.
There you go.
All right.
That worked.
I will, if people come in, I'll let them in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so before we begin, the League of Women Voters of Colorado would like to acknowledge the League of Women Voters of Washington for their dedication to the issue of local news. This proposed concurrence is based on Washington's local news position. Colorado made only minor changes to the Washington position, those changes consisting of replacing the word Washington with Colorado and adjusting grammar. So Washington's consensus process was as follows. A 10-member local news committee became aware of the local news crisis throughout the country and decided to explore this national problem from their own local perspective. The Washington Local News Committee conducted a 2-year study that included interviews with more than 50 stakeholders, including journalists, politicians, national media figures, and local news publishers, and a review of more than 500 documents. They then discussed their findings with 2,500 Washington members, and those members agreed that local journalism is fundamental to democracy and ratified their local news position in 2023. So we thought we'd give a couple of definitions and guidelines. What are consensus and concurrence? And these are my renditions of what consensus and concurrence are, just so to help differentiate between the two. Consensus is the means by which positions are created. All league positions have gone through the consensus process at some point in time. Concurrence is the means by which a league adopts a position of another league. And then from US guidelines, league positions are worded generally and flexibly for use in a variety of advocacy situations. Specific details such as references to legislation and technology should be avoided so as to not limit use in advocacy. Concurrence is a yes vote to adopt another league's position in its entirety. A no vote rejects that position. And I also wanted to mention while we're here that the reason we can do this concurrence now is because back in May, Colorado members adopted changes to our bylaws so that we can adopt positions without going through the conventional program planning calendar. So there's a local news position out there. Why does Colorado need it? Our democracy faces a twofold problem. Citizens are losing access to accurate local news, and citizens need to recognize the difference between accurate news and disinformation. There is a local news crisis in Colorado. In 2009, about 500 journalists covered Denver and Colorado for 2 daily papers. Today, the Rocky Mountain News is gone, and the Denver Post has fewer than 70 print journalists. Across Colorado, other community papers have faced similar decline, and many areas are now called local news deserts. News deserts jeopardize civic participation. Uninformed citizens are less likely to vote and less likely to run for political office, and they tend to simply vote along party lines rather than considering all of their options. News deserts jeopardize government transparency and efficiency. Multiple studies have shown that when a local news source is lost, local government becomes less efficient, taxes and deficits rise, and municipal borrowing costs increase. News deserts jeopardize civil discourse. As Americans lose their local news sources, they turn to national news, which tends to focus on the partisan politics that emphasize a winner-take-all attitude and polarize our country. News deserts jeopardize news literacy. Citizens must have access to the accurate local news that can serve as a reference point for judging and discerning disinformation. News deserts jeopardize public health and safety. News sources alert communities in times of disasters such as wildfires, and they provide public health officials with reliable communication they need to interact with the public. And news deserts jeopardize climate justice. The lack of access to local news can hamper work to inform at-risk neighborhoods and achieve climate justice in those neighborhoods. So these negative impacts are compounded in ethnic and immigrant communities. The loss of local news impacts each of us as described on the previous slide, but the loss of an ethnic local news source only compounds that impact in that community. So Colorado needs a dedicated local news position. The News Access and Literacy Task Force was established based on the League position Citizens' Right to Know. Citizens' Right to Know permits advocacy concerning government transparency. It does not explicitly support advocacy on local news access or news literacy. Put another way, League positions implicitly require a trustworthy, reliable system for disseminating information. But the citizenry's access to sources of accurate, ethical local news cannot be assumed. Colorado currently has no position allowing advocacy concerning news access and news literacy. Okay, so this is the local news position in brief, and then there are 5 points underneath this brief statement, or there's 2. The League of Women Voters of Colorado believes it is the responsibility of the government to provide support for conditions under which credible journalism can survive and thrive. The League of Women Voters of Colorado defines local news as accurate, in-depth coverage of government entities, including but not limited to city councils, county boards of commissioners, health departments, schools, and school boards. So point 1, the League of Women Voters of Colorado supports credible and ethical local journalism in whatever format it is published as essential to our democracy. Point 2, the League of Women Voters of Colorado supports efforts to ensure everyone has access to information for casting an informed ballot and believes that credible local news sources are integral to this pursuit. Point 3, the League of Women Voters of Colorado believes that support for the viability of local news may take a variety of forms. Control of the content must remain exclusively with the news organizations. Point 4, the League of Women Voters of Colorado also believes media literacy and news education, including support for journalism students, are essential. These opportunities should be expanded in schools and throughout communities. And point 5, the League of Women Voters of Colorado believes that everyone should have access to comprehensive, credible local news and that barriers to access should be removed. These barriers include, but are not limited to, geography, economic status, and education. So in 2022, House Bill 22-1121, supporting local news, was introduced, but it failed to pass. This bill sought to create tax credits for small businesses that supported local news media outlets through advertising. Colorado's advocacy would have been more focused and forceful had the proposed local news position been available to use. So mind the gap. The citizens' right to know position only concerns government's first-person reporting of their own actions. Healthy democracies also need high-quality third-person reporting of government actions. The proposed local news position is relevant and needed for increasing the effectiveness of the Legislative Action Committee's work in the Colorado General Assembly. In a nutshell, this position supports access by all to news that is accurate and credible and a third-party accounting of government goings-on, control of content remaining with the newsrooms, and media literacy training for all. These components are not covered by the existing citizens' right to know position. Adopting this local news position will broaden and strengthen Colorado's ability to advocate for universal access to credible local news sources and provide Colorado with a basis for standing against the spread of mis- and disinformation. Please support this position with your concurrence. So we came up with some actionable takeaways. Please encourage your local league board to participate in the vote. The vote can be by board, member, delegate, in accordance with your league bylaws, policies, and procedures. One option that LWVCO Action and Advocacy has put forward is that local league boards vote after encouraging members to review the background information, attend one of these informational sessions, and provide feedback to their board. Local league leaders might want to share a single email where members can provide their feedback. The vote deadline is November 17th. For background information, you can refer to the NOW webpage, and maybe somebody would put that in the chat for us, please. And more actionable takeaways. Please consider adding local news to your list of program planning priorities. The 2024 program planning will focus on national positions, and we hope to draw national attention to the local news crisis. And then, I don't know if any of you out there live in the news desert, but if you live in a news desert or someone you know lives in a news desert, we can recommend making use of league resources. We have a news literacy page, and it's full of tools that will help you decide yourself what is misinformation and disinformation. Nobody's telling you what news to read or anything. It's just a page with useful tools to teach yourself how to spot misinformation and disinformation. And then Vote 411, of course, has election news or information that if you don't have a newspaper, you can go there. And then we have the Observer Corps. We have traditional Observer Corps where league members go out and observe government meetings and come back and report to league. And now we also have a Colorado Citizen Observers, and they go observe public meetings or government meetings and come and report out to the public about those meetings. And Sonia will put that website address in the chat, please, Sonia. And then you can join the News Access and Literacy Statewide Task Force. So thank you for your attention. And now Diana will wrangle the chats.
Well, Barb from the Greeley-Weld League would like to know how we define credible journalism. Kathy, there you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was muted. If one of the things you can do is go to the Washington State position and the whole study that they did. It was really quite thorough. And on page 7, of the study, they define journalism as information that it features systematic discipline of verification. That verification not only presents facts, but it also presents the truth about facts. So that was one of the things that we used, one of the definitions that we used.
I might remind you, if you have a question, you can put it in your chat, and that way we won't miss you, hopefully.
I can add to that a little bit. I just went and got my dictionary just to see what it says. The Oxford American Dictionary defines credible as worthy of belief. And I think it applies across the board to all kinds of ways to look at things, but is it worthy of belief? It's credible.
Yeah. Trustworthy, I think, is the synonym. And when I spoke to the Washington League members, I asked them what they meant, and they said they wanted to convey that it needs to be a legitimate news source, but they wanted a softer word than legitimate. And when we spoke to the journalists at Colorado Community Media and the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel, I think is what it was called, at
Mhm.
the public meeting, they both said that credibility is a word that it's an umbrella term for meeting those the journalism professional code of ethics. Is that what you call it, Diana? Right, the journalist code of ethics, yeah. So
Okay.
Well, Barb also wants to know basically where you could find the Washington study and the materials that were sent out. Do you remember?
Were they sent out to us? Were they included?
Mhm.
I haven't had a chance to look at them all, but
Yeah.
they're on our the News Access and Literacy webpage.
thank
And
you.
I posted that in the chat. I posted the link to it in the chat.
Oh, I see it. Thanks,
Okay.
Kathy.
You're welcome. I don't know if you also want the
Good.
4 principles from the Society of Professional Journalism Code of Ethics, but the 4 principles are to seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, and be accountable and transparent.
And that's on our news literacy page too. The code of ethics is on the news literacy page.
Thanks. It was just used several times, and I was just wants some
Yeah, they
clarification
use that.
on what
Yeah.
that means.
We talked about it quite a bit as well.
Yeah, that
Okay.
we did. We spent a lot of time on that word, Barb. So
Yep.
Good.
you're on the same wavelength.
Good. I'm just not the only one that's okay. Good.
Becky Leach wants to know if the Colorado League's proposed position matches the Washington position exactly, or if we made some modifications.
No, it's exact, because in order to concur, you cannot you can't change the position. It's got to be you take the position in its entirety and say yes or no, except for obvious changes like changing Washington to Colorado, or we found a couple of grammar changes we wanted to make, but you can't make major changes to a position for concurrence.
Goddard at the Boulder County League, it looks like. She says, I'm a little confused about our next steps. Do we go ahead and vote as members of local leagues, or do we go to our board and ask them to support the proposal on behalf of our league?
Well, I think that the Boulder League was going to send out a survey, but if you need to ask your your board of directors to see how they're going to proceed, because I don't know. We left it up to each local league board to decide how they wanted to proceed with the vote in their league.
I think the best thing to do to cover all your bases is to contact your board members and tell them what you think. And then they'll take it from there.
You're saying whether they reach out or not?
Yeah.
Yes,
because
I think there's no harm in doing that, and it lets them know that there's interest in the community, and they'll take some action if they haven't planned it already. So I think the best thing to do after this meeting is to contact your board members and tell them your opinion of the subject.
And I know yesterday Susan Saunders, and I can't remember who the other person from Boulder who attended yesterday morning's meeting, but they asked for the survey that Arapahoe Douglas had sent out, and that link was sent to them. So whether or not they chose to use it, they had that survey.
Well, and then Peggy Leach says in the chat that Boulder County sent out an email to vote, and the board will vote this Thursday. So if that gives you some help there.
Norman from Mesa County League says, I'm wondering if in the Colorado or Washington reports there are pointers to research that explain causality between news deserts and measurements of civic engagement to establish that it isn't simple correlation.
Yeah, I think there are many in the Washington report, they cite the same references that we've seen from Penny Abernathy, I think is the woman's name, and Columbia Journalism Review, PEN America, Margaret Sullivan. They all cite the same statistics that show that civic participation drops when there is no local news source. And governments become less efficient when there's no, and there are real statistics for that. And that I think the Washington report, the references are there. And I know the document that we wrote that's on our website has this references where you can go look at those statistics too. Is that what you meant?
I don't doubt that there's correlation. I'm a researcher, and that I think it would be really interesting for there to be some report that explains how those things are cause one another, instead of just tracking together that, one actually causes the other.
I seem to remember there is some of that in the literature. And
Okay.
if you dug into some of our references, you might find that.
I was hoping y'all had dug.
I think we did at one time, but it's been a long time since we really focused so intently on those specific references. But it seems to me I remember there being exactly that question raised and answered by the data. So,
and I'll repeat that Washington State did a really thorough study. And if you go to the link and see it, their reference list is thorough, is long, and good.
Louisa Young wants to know, would you give an example of how this position would be used? Kathy, you want to address that?
I would be happy to. I would be happy to, because last year, in the General Assembly, we had, there was a bill that was going through that would have supported local news through the advertising that people, that companies were doing in your local newspaper. And it would give a tax credit to the newspapers that qualified for it. And really, they had pretty good strict guidelines as to which news outlets would qualify for this. I was doing the testimony for the league in conjunction with the stakeholders that we were working with, and the stakeholders were all over Colorado, as well as we were getting advice federally as well. And I could only think about our oh, I'm just totally the US position, which really didn't cover this at all. So I was hamstringed that way. And having this position, should another bill, similar kind of bill that would help local news in Colorado, would really help in the testimony that we give in the General Assembly.
Kathy, this is Kay Shaw. I'd like to add, I think you had said earlier, and I'm trying to remember where, that there was a talk about even giving small businesses in your local community some kind of tax credit
Right. That's
for this. And that was talking specifically about a small business. So I think people in your community could see value about why they needed to stay involved in the local paper.
right.
But there wasn't anything to base it on. I think you're exactly right.
Right.
And I'd like to add just one other thing back to the question before. I'm sorry to go back. I should have jumped in a little earlier. On the Washington paper, just so people understand, and this is just a sample of their inside the report, but I'll give you an idea. It is well over 125 pages. And in that, one of the parts about prices is numbers don't lie. Ethnic newspapers causes mis and disinformation. And I think that has some information. And then you go down to another is called the deeper dive. And that's the plight of the papers, but it also talks about what's happening in the area, and then some of the misinformation that we've talked about and how that affects community. And if you just look at the table of contents, if you don't have time to read all the way through it, it might give you specific pages to meet the question that you were trying to find information, because their table of contents is very well laid out.
Okay, well, back to the chat, and this really isn't a question, but there several have shared information. She says that this is Barbara, says that the Arapahoe Douglas group is asking all of its members to read the materials and respond to the survey by Thursday or before Thursday. And then Peggy Leach again says, Boulder County, we received an email to vote, and then the board will vote this Thursday. And any other questions or comments?
Well, just a comment in support of the concurrence. I think it's very well done and laid out and succinct and clear, and all your rationale is very strong, and all the research that you've done on it is excellent.
Thanks, Barb.
Thank you.
Well, I would encourage people to look at that Washington study because it's very well organized. You can glance through it, and they have like an executive summary, if I recall correctly, which basically tells you what's in it. And then you can go zero in on things that you're particularly interested in, whether it's ethnic newspapers or whatever. It's very Washington based, but they've done a lot of work on it.
Yeah, and it's there's a quick facts in there someplace too. I'll give you just all the quick facts, pretty much like we've outlined in this presentation. Okay,
Can I
Diane?
talk to Janine's question again for more clarification?
Yeah, go ahead.
Janine, Kathy Marr and I are both members of the Legislative Action Committee for the state. And we are tasked to studying the bills that come through, and then looking at our positions, whether they're US positions or our state positions, so that we can create a rationale for the bills that we choose to follow and to give testimony for, or not. But it's always based on our positions. And the positions having to do, we just don't have positions on local news. There is nothing that supports that. So it would be a great help if we have legislation that's coming through, that we can talk a lot more specifically and use that position within our rationale when we give oral or written testimony there. Also, what is possible locally is if you have an issue that comes through about supporting local news, you can use the language of the position as you write a letter to the editor, as you are talking to your friends and neighbors about why they should be buying the paper or why they should be subscribing to the public radio station or TV to give support. So we have those outlets that are credible and reliable to help us with democracy, because if we are not informed well, we can't be a well-functioning democracy. Does that help, Janine? And
I'll
Yeah, that does help. It was just a little, I'm just getting up to speed on what the whole issue is. So I appreciate the concrete explanations. Thank you.
And for
Yeah,
the Legislative Action Committee to talk in the name of the league, we always go back to our positions. We always go back to our positions as a starting point. And so we need those to craft what we say.
And I just wanted to add to that, that more and more frequently, both at the national level and the state level, we're seeing legislation come forward that has to do with news. So, and technology merged with it, and, you know, trying to make sure little news outlets can survive with all, you know, against all the big news outlets and the big, you know, the big technology behemoths. So we're seeing this more and more, and that's why it's becoming more and more important that we have a position that we can draw from in order to provide testimony to support or reject or not support a bill that goes before our General Assembly. So that's kind of the big reason for us.
Right, and I think this position for me, the word credible and accurate, it's used all the way through it, and they mention media literacy, and it's really strong on standing against mis and disinformation. We need to be able to support accurate information, but just as important to advocate against misinformation and disinformation.
Sonia once asked, do we have an idea that the teachers union will, whether or not they would participate with the education piece? Because this further strengthens Colorado's push for news literacy, right?
We also have a bill that was passed 2 years ago. It was House Bill 1103 that calls for schools to be teaching news literacy and media literacy in general. And I don't know if you saw Tony's hand up, but Tony has her hand raised.
I may have the chat box. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, thanks. There was a little piece on Colorado Public Radio about news and local newspapers. And one of the stories was about a young person who was being taken advantage of, and that once the story got into the newspaper, their local newspaper, that the situation was straightened out and taken care of. And while that is a government kind of thing, we're not directly dealing with the government, but we're dealing with the rules and regulations and programs that the government has established. So it's important to follow through on some of these things. And this young person perhaps would never have been taken care of, or the problem would never have been taken care of if they didn't have the local newspaper.
The local newspaper is the watchdog of what's happening in our city council, in our school board meetings, in our planning commission meetings, and we can go on and on and on about that. And if we don't have, if we're in a newsletter or a news desert, then it forces us to either attend those meetings in person, or if we're lucky enough to have those broadcasted digitally so that we can listen to it that way. It might be that we just hear about what's happening through word of mouth, and that is not necessarily a credible, reliable source. Okay, so news media outlets are very important to our local democracy.
Janine has a couple of questions here. He says, is there a proposed position that I can study? And I presume that went out with all the other information, right, Linda?
Right,
We
it's
can-
on our, there's a link to the position on our webpage. And the position, it's not in the Washington report, it's on our webpage, and I just read it in the slide deck that we presented. There were 5 points underneath the brief statement.
And the link is in the chat. Again, the link is in the chat to our the task force website, and you can go to it through that link, or you can go to the League of Women Voters of Colorado's website. And task forces is one of the drop-down menus that along the top of the page. So you can just go to the News Access and Literacy website that way, webpage that way.
Yeah, it's better if you log in, because they're all documents, so you need to be logged in as a member to access them. But
He also comments, she says, the use of the word credible in my mind's eye. Whoops. You know, that credibility, in the eye of the beholder, I prefer accurate or factually based. And I'm pretty sure we discussed some of this stuff when we were looking at Washington's position.
Yes.
What credible.
We sure did. We sure did.
mm-hmm.
We
So
have-
this, I think, you know, this is part of what because it's a concurrence idea, we can't really substantially change anything in the position. And we talked for a long time about choosing a different word. Some of them you suggested were some of the choices that we had too. We talked about changing the wording like that, but when it came right down to it, we decided that we're not supposed to be making substantive changes to this. We're only supposed to change what's absolutely necessary, like changing Washington to Colorado. And so we decided in the end that the word credible is perfectly fine, because we know what it's supposed to mean. And we did have those discussions with other people and learned that it is considered the umbrella term. It takes in, there's a lot of meaning that's built into that. So I just wanted to let Janine know that we did have long discussions about this. We know exactly what she's talking about. We understand that concern, but we decided in the end that credible does give us the flexibility we need to use this position for. It gives us what we need in the position. So it works for us.
And I'd like to add something to that. The idea with a concurrence, we felt that it was better because then we would be drawing together with other states. Otherwise, if we start completely over, then we have to get other groups to join in with us. There are one of the things we researched was a number of other states that have some interest in this topic. And so we felt like if we concurred with Washington, it would be more likely that other groups that are interested in the same topic in other states would begin their concurrence too. And because we felt this is something we don't want to wait 3 or 4 years till we can work over every word. And so it was more about we wanted to be able to try to use some action, especially in our legislature this year for ourselves.
And Washington State has said that they are going to take this to the national convention. So that all the, the other states will be joining in on it. And Linda, I can't remember it. Did you post their video now on
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, the Washington put out a little 7-minute video to promote their position. And it goes through their study process and the main points of their position. And at the end, it says we are going to take this to the national convention. So stay tuned. So we're staying tuned.
Dean asks, what does NAL stand for? We kind of use that and figure everybody else knows. Linda?
It's news access and literacy.
Jan Mormon from Mesa County again says, behind the decline of local news is the lack of viability as a business. How might these positions be used to secure the funding needed to reverse access to local news?
Well, one of the things we can do is talk to the legislators about sponsoring a bill that would, in one way or another, support local news. They can't, the state government cannot give money to the newspapers. Okay. That would be influence buying or seen as doing that. So they have to find other ways around that to help local news stay in business. And that was part of the rationale behind House Bill 221121. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. It didn't get to the floor votes. So.
Right. And I think at the national level, there's this, till we have a national position, but I think we could still tell national our opinion. Then at the national level, there are there's proposed legislation so that a lot of the reason that newspapers are going out under is because they've lost their advertising income to the internet. And some of the regulations would force the social media platforms to pay the publishers of newspapers for the use of their news stories. None of it's passed yet, but that's another way I think they think maybe it'd be regulation.
Mm-hmm.
I could add one of the ideas that has come out of legislation is that the government could assign all of their legal ads to go back into the newspapers. If you remember, there used to be all those gray pages once upon a time. And when it became no longer the law that you had to publish a legal ad in the paper, that took a huge chunk of budget from papers. And so somebody suggested that the government be required to put all of its legal ads in the news, and that did not pass. For a number of reasons. One interesting piece of the local journalism bill that didn't pass, that Kathy's been talking about, is a lot of these papers are owned by hedge funds. The Denver Post is owned by a hedge fund. And so if you incentivize people to advertise, or businesses to advertise with their local news, some of them might be advertising with a hedge fund that just gutted the thing. And that became a pretty sticky point, as I recall.
That's why we had the guidelines in that bill, and those guidelines got tightened as it was going through the initial committees. That was really good. I was impressed with what was happening in that element of this process.
Yeah, and that issue will probably come up again as ideas percolate.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add a little bit to that. Jan might be interested in watching the video of the public meeting we had with the journalists from Colorado Public Media and the Grand Junction Sentinel, because they talked at length really about the financing issues and, you know, certain ideas that were kicking around. And I think more and more we're seeing these ideas get kicked around at the national level, local level, state level, or trying to figure out new funding paradigms for newspapers and other public media for media. So I think that might be of interest to people that want to hear from journalists that are living this. That recording on our website of the September 27th public meeting we had with the journalists might be of interest to you.
And I think another important point of this is we're beginning to see it in other places. Just on October 26th of this year, DU ran a democracy summit. And part of the Democracy Summit, one of the topics was the critical role of local media in the democratic ecosystem. And they had the CEO of the National Trust for Local News. They had someone from the Colorado Media Project, and they also had someone from Global Strategies. And then they also had someone who is with the Gates Foundation that is looking at different ways to local media. So I think the thing is, if the more we can have ourselves prepared, the better we are when things like this come out. Because I was talking to a couple of the speakers there afterwards, and they didn't think anybody else except media people were dealing with this. And they were really very pleased to see that the league had an interest in this, and they really were glad, just as the two people who spoke to us, this group that they're talking about the recording from, all of those are happy to see that there are other people who can step forward in their behalf.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Barbara from Arapahoe, she has a cautionary, with some advice to give. She says to find the information on this proposed concurrence on the Colorado News Access and Literacy Task Force webpage, be sure to scroll down to find information in the blue box that says the News Access and Literacy Task Force is greatly concerned about the proliferation of news deserts. Basically, to scroll down, and is that right, Barb?
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
Yes.
Yeah, she has a whole essay on here, so look on the chat.
Save the chat and use it as your instructions on how to use the webpage.
Mm-hmm.
Does everybody know how to save the chat? I mean, we can post a link to the chat as well, but you can save it yourself. If you go into the chat and go down to the bottom where it has 3 dots, if you click on the 3 dots, Save Chat comes up, and you just click it and it saves it to your computer.
So we had a comment from one of the participants tonight. I'm curious how other people might feel about this position. Has anybody formed an opinion? Do you have any comments they want to share?
They're being shy. Don't be shy. We aren't. We love this position.
Yes.
Well, and unmute first. Peggy says she's in favor of this position.
Yay.
Thanks, Peggy.
Mhm.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Yes.
And I'd like to add, I think that one of the best things about this is I've been in league for over 40 years. You do all these studies. They're wonderful, but they take a lot of time. And when you see someone else who's put in all this work, 2 years, and done a study, and we can take that and do a consensus here, and be able to maybe use it for the legislative session coming up, assuming that it passes and everybody agrees that these are good positions, we can just jump right in and start taking action. And I
Right.
think that's what we really like to do.
Barb says, thanks to the task force, our lobbyists, and to those who worked on this. This will fill an important gap in our positions coverage. And would you go over how to save the chat again for Janine and maybe others?
Open the chat. If you click on the chat, you can open it, go all the way to the bottom. You'll see 3 dots. If you hover over it, it'll say more. If you click on the 3 dots, then on my computer, save chat is the first thing you can click on. And that'll save it to your computer.
Says she just found it. Thanks.
I see Jan has another question.
I don't want to take away from someone else's time to speak, but it seems like there's a bit of a lull. So and I'm not saying this to be I just think the conversation goes deeper, and I am a computer scientist. So I think, you know, when I scanned through the Washington report, I did watch their video. They do cite that the local newspapers have gone out of business because, and when they surveyed that, they said 1/3 of the people found the information not to be trustworthy. And so I think that, you know, there may be a correlation between people not wanting to subscribe to their newspaper locally because they thought it was partisan and not trustworthy. Not saying that it doesn't help to have a local newspaper, but I do think that we shouldn't just rest on our laurels with these good positions. We should move forward, because I think making the word credible is actually hitting the nail on the head. And in a world where we've got blockchain, where we can actually track the source of things and report that, we should maybe work with some of the people we've worked with before in the who's who in the computer science world, like we did for election security, and try to wrap our minds around this. I know many of us feel that that's beyond us, but it's not. And if we were to really understand how we might be able to make credibility actionable, it's going to be something that, you know, we're already there, you know, so a lot of these news organizations are going to start generating their stories through AI if it's not already happening like that. And so this is a good start. I think it's important, but I think we need to just keep going full speed.
You know, Jan, on the News Access and Literacy Task Force website, there are links to all sorts of really good directions on how to be judging misinformation and disinformation. And I think it's like a first step for people to be able to, the general public to be able to do that. Sure. So I encourage you to really look at all the resources that we have gathered over the last few years, and continue to add to that, to the web page.
Right. And the Alaska and the Maine leagues have a digital democracy series that deals with digital democracy. Artificial Intelligence Monday, they're going to have a guest speaker. I just sent out the information, but I could post that on the News Access and Literacy. That's a really good, their series of guests have been really good, really informative, and it's all about AI and technology. And I think some of what you're talking about, Jan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that as well. It sounded like it's right up Jan's alley. She would, I think,
Right.
if she's,
Right.
yeah, they're fabulous talks they have, and really, I mean, quite accomplished speakers that they have. They're very, you know, nationally acclaimed people that they get to talk on these topics. They're wonderful, and yeah. So, and I just wanted to also say that it's important that we keep these positions really general, so they can be applied in multiple variety of ways, because you don't know what's going to come up, but you need a position to advocate from. So part of this, I mean, some people might be bothered by the overly basic or general wording of this, but that's precisely, it's designed to be that way, so you can apply it to many cases. But I appreciate what Jan had to say. I think she's right. I feel the same way, that we really got to dive in on the what's going to happen with AI and related technological advances very soon. And that's these series that Maine and Alaska are sponsoring are just wonderful.
Mhm.
And the example on Monday is the one with Tom Wheeler. For those of you who may not be familiar, who's chairman of who was the former chairman of the FCC, and he's going to be, his is called Tech Lash, like whiplash, and talking about where we need to get ahead of the curve, just as you're talking about. So that's on Monday, but they have a lot of others that we've listened to. They're
One thing I would like to add about the News Access Literacy Group, early on, we had a discussion that we weren't going to just knee-jerk support newspapers and journalism in their current form, that it's possible that some things don't deserve to survive if they've lost the trust, if they're doing it wrong. Like, we can't just have leagues stand in the position of, support any newspaper, or, it's much more nuanced than that. And we can't even know the forms that news of the future might take. And we had a very interesting example of this with the Observer Corps. So we were going into meetings and trying really hard to record them so that any notes we would take would be backed up by video. And it was very hard work, like, too high of a bar, really, for the time that it took and the tech that it took to do that. And why is nonprofit league doing this when government agencies should be doing this for themselves? And then when AI came out in the middle of all this, all of the partners were like, well, it's clear to see that AI is just going to do this eventually. Like, as soon as we put all this effort into learning it, well, AI will be able to take a regular Zoom recording of a meeting like this and give us minutes, give us notes, boil it all for us. Like, so some of the things, of course, will be good that AI has to offer, and then others more sinister. And it is going to take constant vigilance. So Jan's point is appreciated. We don't know what's coming, but it's going to be a whole bunch of different stuff, for better and for worse.
Well, for that, November 20th, Maine, Alaska, Barb put a link in the chat. So if you want to register for that. And I can say personally that you can get on their newsletter list very easily.
Right. Register once and you're a member for life.
Register once and you're on their news list, their newsletter. So, but they have been good, and there is a link in the chat right now if you save it again.
Mhm.
Yes, you do have to save it again. Okay.
Right.
As things are added to it.
Okay, we have any other questions or comments or announcements or anything you all want to say?
Yes, Barb got Zoom has just released some new features that will use AI to help us generate minutes from Zoom's meeting transcript that they create. AI hopefully will be helpful and trustworthy for uses like this, says Barb. Credible, yes. AI can make things up too. I've learned from some of the main seminars.
Yeah, I'm a translator by profession, and we've been using machine translation and artificial intelligence for a long time. Well, not quite artificial intelligence, and it's all fine as a tool, but you need a human being to check it. You need the human person behind the tool. They're just tools. They're tools to make life easier and maybe give you time to do something else, but somebody needs to check it.
Well, it's like getting that scam on your email and you go, what? I don't remember ordering this. What does this have to do with PayPal? And it doesn't make sense. Those are several bright flashing red lights and bells ringing saying, no, 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 this is not right.
All right. Okay. Is everybody, I don't want to cut anybody off, but I don't want to make you stay beyond what is. So is everybody ready to go? Any more comments? Okay, please vote for this concurrence. We love this position and we think it's not going to solve everybody's problems, but I think it will help. That's what we all think. Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you very much. Bye.